Hey, welcome and thank you for tuning in to today's video. I'm really excited for today because I have the Microcosm by Hologram. We're going to be listening to what this thing can do. I got my MPC right here and I'm going to be running some samples through it and putting it to the test. I want to say thank you to Hologram for sending this out to me as we're about to run some samples through this effects pedal and see where our samples go. Now, it's kind of funny because the Microcosm to me is kind of like a rocket launcher. You throw your signal through it and it almost feels like your sound is in outer space, which is crazy. And before I jump into it, I want to let you guys know that I live in a 2-car garage with my wife and my daughter. And when I make music at 11 to 12 at night. I put my headphones on and I get in my little corner, it's all dark, and I will start exploring and creating music. And when I put on or turn on the Microcosm, it freaks me out because it really sounds like it's alive. It's pretty cool. So we're going to listen to it and throw some signal through this thing and see what we come up with. You guys already know I use a lot of samples with my workflow. That's something I enjoy. So I'm really excited to show you guys what we can do with the Microcosm. So let's jump right into it. So right here I have a beat that I was working on, and right now we're going to introduce Microcosm. This beat is done, it's made, but I feel like it could be a little more creative when it comes down to the sample. I want us to listen to the beat by itself, and then my goal is to run my sample in through Microcosm and get creative so I can add some variation to what we already have done. Let's go ahead and listen to the beat by itself. So that sounds awesome. I love the way this sounds. Right here I have 3 elements. I have my sample chops, I got my drums, and I have a bass line. For my sample, if I solo the sample, there's some very soft vocals that I chopped up. Now, that right there on its own sounds really nice, but let's see how it sounds when we run it through Microcosm. My goal is to probably do an introduction and then it drops into the beat. So what I have my setup right here is I'm going to come out of my MPCs from outputs 5, the back of the MPC, and Microcosm, real quick on the rundown of Microcosm, it has a mono input. Does not take a stereo input, but it does give you a stereo output. So I'm okay with running out my sample into Microcosm because with the effects, the reverb, delays, it's going to come out stereo. And trust me, it just opens up your signal so beautiful. With the MPC, I don't have a camera showing the screen of the MPC, but the way I'm going to do this, because I want to keep my sample in stereo, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my mixer and I'm going to utilize my sends. Within your mixer, you'll see your sends. Again, I apologize. I'll make a video separately and showing you guys the back end on this, but I'm going to just talk through what I'm going to do. I'm going to go in through send 1, and I'm going to send my signal at 100%. And then I'm going to go from my mixer on programs view into my returns view. In return 1, I'm going to send the output of return 1 to outputs 5. Now, outputs 5 is in the back of my MPC. That's where I have this cable going into Microcosm input. And now coming out of Microcosm in stereo, I'm coming back into samples input left and right. Now, before I hit play, I do want to just give you a quick run through of Microcosm. The Microcosm will have 4 different effects and signal paths. You got micro loop, the granules, the glitch, and multi-delay. The micro loop is pretty much a layer of short loops played back at various speeds, which is combined from rhythmic phrases and tonal colors, which gets really interesting because as I use, let's say, a sequence, this is actually one of my favorite ones right here. If I hit play, it's just creating variations of loops, and those loops that is going to be given me is going to pitch them up or down, and it just gets very interesting what happens to my sample. I'll go ahead and hit play so we can listen to what it's doing. So as you can hear, it's creating a bunch of short loops that is pitched up a few octaves. In this mosaic option, we could start in option number 1 with this is your cursor, and you could kind of bang through different sounds. And if we hit play, we can actually listen to what this is going to be doing. The intensity knob, which is up here, is just, as you're putting up this knob, it's just going to create more variation of that effect. The repeat is going to give you more, it's kind of like your feedback. Now you also have your tap tempo right here. And you can bang through different sounds of this mosaic preset. As you guys can hear how this is just creating variation for us. That's what I'm talking about. When I'm like at 11 or 12 at night listening to this, it gets kind of creepy sometimes because it almost feels like this thing is talking on its own. It keeps going. I'm going to bring down the feedback or the repeat. Now, real quick, before we go in any further, you also have this reverb. Well, it's actually called space. But this space/reverb, if you hold down this shift button, you could select different settings right here. The first setting right here is at kind of like a short reverb effect, and the second setting is also a short reverb effect, but it gets a little darker. And then your last two settings, I'm gonna try to do this with one hand so you guys can see. This one is like a long reverb, and then this last setting is like a long reverb, but it gets a little darker. Once you let go, you could use this as your intensity. How much reverb do you want to add to that feedback? Let's go ahead and hit play and listen to that reverb from nothing to something. So that opens up pretty wide, which sounds awesome. My favorite, though, is this sequence setting right here. This is my favorite when it comes down to vocals, or if you have samples with the vocals like the way we do right now. I'm going to hit play, and we're actually probably going to stick with sequence right now in the micro loop, and we're going to listen to what this is going to do to our sample. Sequence is actually grabbing short looping samples and rearranging them into new sequences. Sounds pretty weird, right? But let me go ahead and hit play. This is actually my favorite setting when it comes down to vocal chops or samples that have vocals on them. Kind of banking through the different presets on sequence setting. Then you got your shape up here. This is the shape of that, kind of like the envelope shape. And this will give you different sounds of that setting you're in. Oh, that's dope. That sounds awesome, but if you click this cursor as a button, it will just reverse the whole entire effects, and then the sample is playing forward. It just sounds pretty crazy. Now it's going to reverse. Now let's bring the beat in and listen to how this sounds with everything together. Now, like we said in the beginning, this is a mono input, but it definitely opens up your entire mix. As you guys heard the before and after. The micro loop setting, like all these settings right here on this section, they are pitching up and down the short loops that it's creating for you, which is kind of wild. Run your drums through that, percussion through that. It just creates kind of like random rhythmic loops that it's either a hit or miss. It might work phenomenal, and sometimes it just won't work at all. For me, I've been finding really good sounds and textures when I'm running samples that have vocals in them. Now let's move over to our next bank, which is going to be the Granulator. Now the Granulator is kind of creating and grabbing fragments of that sound that you're running through it and just creating just big, wide atmospheric textures with that effect. Now let's go ahead and hit play and listen to what this is doing. This activity is like the intensity of that effect. If you want to get very, want the intensity of that effect to be drastic, you put it up all the way. If you like that effect and you don't want it to be as drastic, you could dial it back down. Let's go through some different presets right here. Ooh, that sounds nice. Now, if I turn off Microcosm, it's by itself, with it back on. Now let's listen to this tunnel effect. Yo, that sounds pretty wild. Oh. So, there's certain samples or drums or percussive sounds that I'll run through this thing that will work amazing. And then there's other times where I'll run signal through this and it just doesn't click with me. But most of the times when I run signal through it, I'm not expecting anything from it. I'm just listening to what it's going to give back to me. It's like you throw something at it and you kind of just, it's a hit or miss, but you play around with these different settings. We're just going through the micro loop and the granules. Right here, we also have the glitch and the multi-delay. There's so much more this thing can do, but I'm just going through some of these presets that sound awesome, and it gives me different options to what I'm already doing. A lot of the times, I've mentioned this before, but with my sample-based production, I'm only using 3 elements, which is my sample, my drums, and my bass. And when you're working with not as much, it could get very hard because you don't have a lot to play with. You're just dealing with a little bit, which is actually harder to get creative. But when you have tools like Microcosm that is adding to what you're already doing, again, doesn't mean that I'm always going to use it, but when it works, it sounds beautiful. Let's listen just to the effect from Microcosm. I actually like how that sound on top of my sample. So now I have my introduction of this beat. So it has that effect laying at the bottom of that sample, then it jumps into the verse. And whenever I want, I can bring that effect back in. And I can take it back out. Again, it's giving me different options to play with my beat. As I'm performing my beat, I'm able to bring in different elements to add texture, especially when you're running percussion through the Microcosm. This is not going to be my last video with Microcosm because running your drums or percussive sounds through this thing gets really, really fun. Again, there's different textures that it'll give back to me. Right now, I want to demonstrate this with samples, with chops that have vocals in them, because the way the micro loop is pitching up and down short loops of that sample just sounds really fun for me. So thank you guys for hanging out with me. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you guys want to check out Microcosm or have any questions on this, let me know. Also, go down to the link in the description of this video. I'll leave the link to Microcosm. Thank you so much for Hologram sending this out to me, and I'll catch you guys on our next video. Peace.